The surgical team was already scrubbing out when Nurse Callahan knocked twice on the trauma bay door and said simply, "We have a problem." Petra Voss had been on her feet for 11 hours. She had a cold coffee sitting on the nurse's station counter, a protein bar she hadn't opened since 7 that morning, and a patient in Bay 4 who was finally mercifully stable. She did not have the bandwidth for a problem. But she followed Callahan down the hall anyway, because that was what you did at St. Michael's Trauma Center in Halifax. You followed the knock. The man on the gurney was unconscious. 2 gunshot wounds, one through the left shoulder, one grazing his side, close enough to the kidney that Petra's stomach tightened the moment she saw the imaging. He had been brought in by 2 men who had not given their names, had not answered questions, and had left before the paramedics had even finished transferring him to the bay. Attending on call, Dr. Finch was stuck in a 12-hour surgery upstairs with a ruptured aorta that left Petra, the charge nurse, running trauma stabilization while they waited for backup. She had done this before. She could do it again. She pulled on fresh gloves and moved to the head of the bed, already reading the vitals on the monitor. Blood pressure dropping. Oxygen sat borderline. She called for a second IV line and started rattling off orders to the 2 nurses behind her, her voice even, her hands steady. Then she looked at his face. The room didn't stop. The monitors kept beeping. Callahan was still talking behind her. The world kept moving exactly as it had before. But something in Petra's chest cracked open like ice in April. 6 years. She had spent 6 years building a life in which this man did not exist. She had moved from Toronto to Halifax, changed hospitals, changed her hair, changed her last name back to her mother's maiden name after the divorce that never was, because they had never actually married, because he had made sure of that, because Cedric Lorne did not make permanent things out of people like her. And here he was, bleeding on her table. His name was Cedric Lorne. In Halifax, people didn't know that name. In Halifax, Petra had a small apartment above a Portuguese bakery, a daughter named Willa, who was 5 years old and obsessed with penguins, and a life that was ordinary and unremarkable and entirely her own. In Toronto, Cedric Lorne was not ordinary. In Toronto, the name meant something that made lawyers go quiet, and city councillors choose their words carefully, and certain restaurants have a corner table perpetually reserved even when they claim to be full. She had known what he was when she met him. She had told herself it didn't matter. She had been 24 and idealistic and, she could admit now, spectacularly naive. Petra steadied her breathing. She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist beside the monitor cuff, an old habit, something tactile to anchor herself, and felt his pulse, weak but present. She made a clinical decision to treat him the same way she would treat anyone else who came through that door, because that was the only decision she was capable of making in this moment that wouldn't unravel her entirely. "Get me 2 units O-neg and call Dr. Osi down from cardio," she said. "And somebody find out what happened to his security detail." The last thing she needed, she thought, was for whoever had put 2 bullets in Cedric Lorne to walk through her emergency department looking for him. The first time Petra had seen Cedric Lorne, he had been standing in the rain outside the Royal Conservatory on Bloor Street, holding an umbrella he wasn't using over a stranger's head while the stranger tried to hail a cab. She had watched from the steps, half-sheltered under the overhang, still holding her violin case. It had been such a strange, small gesture. Not the umbrella, the way he had kept holding it even after the cab pulled away, seemingly unaware that he was now standing in the rain alone, looking mildly puzzled by his own actions. She had laughed. Out loud, without meaning to. He had looked over. That had been the beginning, which she understood now was also the ending, the way some things are. She had been a session musician then, scraping together a living playing weddings and studio work and the occasional film score, saving money to go back to school for nursing. He had been, she would find out later, many things. The legitimate face was a property development firm with offices in 3 cities. The other face was something she would spend the better part of 2 years piecing together from half-sentences and careful silences, and the way certain men looked at the floor when he entered a room. She had asked him once, directly. It was 2 a.m, and they were in his kitchen, and she had been there for 8 months by then, and she had looked at him across the marble island and said, "Tell me what you actually do." He had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had said, "I make problems disappear." She had thought, foolishly, that he was being theatrical. It took her another 4 months to understand he was being precise. The day she left, she had been 12 weeks pregnant. She had found out 4 days earlier and had not told him, because 4 days earlier, she had also found a man zip-tied to a chair in the storage room of the Lakeshore property. And Cedric had walked in behind her and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not embarrassment, something clinical and measuring, as though he was deciding something. He had said, "Go wait in the car." She had gone. She had waited. And then she had thought about the baby and about that expression on his face, and she had gotten out of the car and never gone back. She had called twice from a payphone, an actual payphone, which she had to look up the location of online, not because she thought he was tracking her phone, but because she needed the physical distance of a different object in her hand to make the calls feel real. He hadn't answered either time. She had left no messages. She had assumed that was the end. Dr. Osi arrived in 12 minutes, which was fast. He took one look at the shoulder wound, conferred with the attending who had finally been reached by phone, and determined that the bullet had been surgically removed elsewhere, recently and competently. Someone had already treated him, someone with skill and equipment. The graze on his side was the issue. It had nicked something it shouldn't have, and he was bleeding internally in a slow, persistent way that would become a serious way if they didn't address it. Petra handed off to the OR prep team and stepped back. She stood in the hallway outside Trauma 2 with her back against the wall and her arms crossed over her chest, and she gave herself exactly 60 seconds to feel whatever she was going to feel. She felt rage. Old and cold and very quiet, the kind that has been stored in the back of a closet for years and has calcified into something almost manageable. She felt fear. Not for him, for Willa. Willa, who was at the after-school program at the community center on Barrington Street right now, making a craft out of felt and pipe cleaners with a teenager named Marcus, who helped with afternoon pickup on Tuesdays. Willa, who looked almost nothing like Petra and almost everything like Cedric, which was a fact Petra had cataloged once, and then firmly filed away under things she was not going to think about. Willa, who had never once asked about her father in a way that required a real answer, because she was 5 and 5-year-olds ask things like, why do dogs sneeze? And is the moon made of cheese or just regular rock? And Petra had been able to live inside that window of easy questions, knowing it would eventually close. 60 seconds were up. She pushed off the wall and went back to work. He was out of surgery by 9:30 that evening. Stable. He would need monitoring overnight, possibly longer. The 2 men who had brought him in had not returned. There was no name in the system. Whoever had made the intake error had listed him as John Doe, and no one had corrected it, possibly because no one was sure what his actual name was, and possibly because the 2 nurses who had processed his arrival had a very particular look on their faces that suggested they had been given certain information they were not comfortable relaying. Petra knew that look. She had worn it herself, once. She was not supposed to be in his room. She had handed off his care to the overnight team, had finished her shift documentation, had eaten half the protein bar, and thrown away the cold coffee and retrieved her coat from her locker. She was supposed to go home. She went to room 14 instead. He was pale against the pillow in the way that dark-haired people go pale, all the color draining to the surface and leaving something stark behind. There were lines in his face she didn't remember. 6 years would do that, she supposed. He was 41 now. She had done the math on her way down the hall. She stood in the doorway. The monitor beeped steadily. His breathing was even. She said nothing. She just looked at him for a moment, in the way you look at a scar you've mostly forgotten. Not with grief exactly, but with a kind of tired recognition. Then his eyes opened. He found her immediately. Not the way people find you when they're coming up from anesthesia. Slowly and with confusion, he found her the way he had always done things, directly and without apparent effort, as though the room had simply arranged itself to point at her. He said her name. Not her name now. Her name then. The name she had stopped using. Petra. His voice was rough from the intubation. He sounded, she thought, exactly the same. "You're stable," she said, because it was the most professional sentence she could construct. "The bleeding's been controlled. You'll need to stay for observation." His eyes didn't move from her face. "You're in Halifax," he said. "You're in my hospital," she replied, "which I didn't arrange." He was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped. Down the hall, someone was talking about a patient in 11 with a complicated hip fracture. "How long?" he asked. 6 years, she said. "Give or take." Something moved across his face that she did not examine. "You became a nurse. I became a charge nurse," she said. "There's a difference." She should leave. She knew she should leave. She had a child to pick up and a life to return to, a life in which this man had no part and no knowledge and no claim whatsoever. She should walk out the door, go back to Barrington Street, pick up Willa from the evening care program, make pasta, read the Penguin book they were currently on chapter 4 of, and sleep. She stayed in the doorway. "Who shot you?" she asked. "An occupational hazard, right." She looked at him. "Is it coming here?" The hazard. The question was not idle. She knew him well enough to know that whatever had happened tonight had a geometry to it, a series of causes and likely consequences. And she needed to know whether those consequences were going to walk through the entrance of St. Michael's Trauma Center and become her problem. Cedric looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. "Not tonight," he said. "That's not a no," he said. "It isn't." She pushed off the doorframe. "I'll have security briefed in the morning, Petra." She stopped. "I looked for you," he said, "after." She turned slightly, not all the way. "I know. I'm aware of how thorough you can be when you decide to look for something. I couldn't find you. I know that too." She looked at him then, fully, the way she had given herself 60 seconds in the hallway to feel things. "I worked very hard at it." She left. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 4 minutes before she was able to drive. She picked up Willa at 7:45. Willa had made a penguin out of felt, black and white, with an orange beak that was slightly too large for the body, which Willa had decided was a design choice and not an error. "His name is Gerald," Willa informed her in the car. "Gerald is a great name," Petra said. "He's a rockhopper. They have yellow eyebrows." Willa held Gerald up to the window so he could look out at the street. "I told Marcus about the eyebrows and he didn't know. I knew more than Marcus. You know a lot about penguins." "I know everything about penguins," Willa said, with the serene confidence of someone who has not yet been contradicted on this point. Petra watched the road and thought, "I have to tell him. Not tonight. Not tomorrow." But the way Cedric Lorne was in Halifax now, in a room with her name on the chart intake, and his John Doe status that would not survive a second day, there was no version of this that stayed contained on its own. She had spent 6 years building a container, and it had cracked tonight, and she could either make a decision or have the decision made for her. She was not. She had decided at 24, the kind of person who let decisions be made for her. She was working on still being that person. He improved faster than she expected. By the following afternoon, he was sitting up and had apparently made it clear to the nursing staff that he would be arranging his own discharge whether they facilitated it or not, which had resulted in a brief and colorful standoff with the floor supervisor that Petra heard about secondhand. She arrived for her shift at 3, reviewed his chart, and went to room 14. He was dressed. Civilian clothes, which meant someone had brought them, which meant someone knew where he was. "You have 24 more hours of recommended observation," she said. "I've noted the recommendation." She closed the door behind her. "The men who brought you in, were they your people?" "Yes." "Did you tell them who you're being treated by?" A pause. Precise, controlled. That was how he thought. She remembered it, how you could watch him process information if you knew what to look for. "Not specifically," he said. "Then you should know," she said, "that Willa has an art class on Thursday afternoons at the Citadel Hill Community Studio, and she takes the same route there every week, and she is 5 years old, and she looks." Petra stopped. Steadied. "She looks like you." The room was very quiet. Cedric sat with that information in the way she had expected him to, still absorbing it, not reacting immediately, the way deep water doesn't react immediately when you throw something in. "Willa," he said finally, Yes, she's mine. Yes, Petra kept her voice level. She doesn't know. She's 5. I intend to tell her when she's ready to understand it on my timeline, and I intend to have a conversation with you about that before anything else happens. But right now, I need you to understand that whatever you have following you through my city, I'll handle it. His voice had shifted. Something beneath it. I'll handle it today. I don't need you to handle it, Petra said. I need you to understand what's at stake. He stood up. He moved carefully. The shoulder was in a sling, and he was pale still, though less so, and he crossed the room until he was close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. I do understand, he said. I understand better now than I did 40 seconds ago. She held his gaze. I'm not saying this to give you leverage. I'm saying it so you know what I have to lose. I know. His voice was quiet. I know what you have to lose. I'm going to make sure you don't lose it. She should have said something measured and professional. She should have handed him a discharge form and walked out. What she said was, she has your eyes. I don't know if that's easier or harder to say out loud. Something in his face changed, just briefly, just enough. Easier, he said. Tell her. He stopped, started again. When she's ready, tell her I would like to meet her, that there's no pressure, that it will be on her terms. On her terms, Petra repeated, and mine, and yours. He said it without hesitation. He left that afternoon. Security had been briefed, which turned out to be unnecessary, because whatever problem had been following, Cedric Lorne apparently concluded its business with remarkable speed. Petra would learn this in pieces over the following weeks, not because Cedric told her directly, but because he sent a lawyer to her apartment above the Portuguese bakery, with a document that outlined, in careful legal language, an arrangement designed entirely around Petra's autonomy and Willa's welfare, and which gave Cedric Lorne precisely nothing he had not been explicitly offered. She read it twice. Then she called the number at the top of the document and said, "This is more than I expected. Tell me what you want changed," Cedric said. "Nothing," she said. "That's why I'm calling." A pause. "Can I see her?" Petra looked out the window. The bakery below was closed and the street was quiet, and Willa was asleep in the next room with Gerald the felt penguin tucked under her arm. "She wants a rockhopper penguin for Christmas," Petra said. "The stuffed animal kind. The specific kind with yellow eyebrows. I have not been able to find one at any of the 3 toy stores I've checked." Silence on the line. Then, "I'll find one." "I know you will," Petra said. "That's not an invitation. It's information. I understand the difference." She believed him. That was the complicated part. She had always, despite everything, believed him when he said he understood things. The trouble was that understanding something and doing the right thing with that understanding were different skills. And Cedric had historically been better at the first than the second. But he had been in a hospital room for 24 hours with a bullet wound and a revelation that changed the geometry of his life. And the first thing he had done was send a document that gave Petra everything she needed and ask for nothing. She thought, people can learn things. Even the kind of people who make problems disappear. She thought, Willa is going to ask about her father eventually. The window of penguin questions is closing. She thought, I am so tired of deciding alone. Saturday, she said. There's a public skate at the Oval at 2. She loves it. She falls down constantly and thinks it's funny. Petra paused. She doesn't need to know who you are yet. You can just be someone I know. Saturday at 2, Cedric said. If you're late, Petra said, we will not be there when you arrive. I won't be late. She hung up. She stood at the window for a while, watching the street, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not forgiveness, which was a larger thing that would take much longer and might not fully arrive. Not relief. Something quieter. The particular feeling of a decision made and unmade, and made again finally landing somewhere solid. She had built something in Halifax, a real thing with a daughter and a bakery below her window and a cold coffee at the nurse's station and a felt penguin named Gerald. It was hers, and she was not giving any of it back. But Willa was going to want to know, and Petra, who had left a payphone number and driven away at 24 with one decision made and another unmade, had always known this day would come. She went to bed. On Saturday at exactly 5 minutes to 2, She and Willa arrived at the oval. Willa was wearing her purple jacket and carrying her skates by the laces, arguing passionately that Gerald should be allowed to watch from the boards. A man was standing near the entrance. Dark coat, shoulder held slightly carefully, the way you hold something that is healing. He was looking at the ice. He heard them before he turned, or maybe he didn't need to hear them. Maybe he had been watching the entrance the way Petra had always known he watched things, quietly, from the edge, cataloging. He turned. He saw Willa, and for just a moment the most controlled man Petra had ever known looked completely undefended. Gerald comes to watch, Petra told her daughter, without looking away from Cedric. That's not negotiable. Obviously, Willa said, and tucked the penguin under her arm and marched toward the ice, already planning her first fall. Cedric looked at Petra. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me, she said. Prove it. She followed her daughter onto the ice and did not look back, which was, she had learned, how you moved forward, not by looking back, but by knowing, without looking, that some things were still there.